Hi, welcome everybody. My name is Lisa Demetrius. Welcome to the Petaluma Art Center. I am the president of the board, and also I am a member of the exhibition committee, and this is the last day of an exhibit we did here about reflection and memory. And it's so exciting to have Denise Ward in another one of her conversations with Orin Carpenter. I had the pleasure of meeting him last week when we were attending Denise speaking with Rose Hill up at the Museum of Sonoma County. And that was just a really amazing conversation about creativity, the source of those ideas, and the back and forth. I loved listening to both of you, and I can't wait to hear what you all talk about today. So welcome everybody, and let's start the show.
Thank you, Lisa. Good afternoon, everybody. I want to start off with an acknowledgement for the land that we're on today. The County of Sonoma recognizes that we're on the ancestral lands of the Coast Miwok, Pomo, and Wapo, who are the original caretakers of this area. We respectfully acknowledge the indigenous people who have been stewarding and maintaining relationships on this land. As knowledge keepers for millennia, we acknowledge indigenous people as traditional stewards of the land, and this land acknowledgement calls us to commit to continuing to learn how to be better stewards of the land we inhabit. We recognize that every resident of Sonoma County has benefited and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land. And on behalf of Petaluma Blacks for Community Development and for Petaluma Arts Center, and also for the Eames Institute, I want to say thank you to all three of those organizations for sponsoring these conversations that I've been having the last couple of weeks. I want to say thank you to Lisa. Yeah. I want to say thank you to you, especially for having us here this afternoon. And also, I want to say thank you to Faith Ross. Faith, will you please stand? Faith Ross is the president of Petaluma Blacks for Community Development, and she has been instrumental in sponsoring me to do these talks. This afternoon, I want to introduce my new buddy, Dr. Orin Carpenter. We met a few months ago. It's kind of like finding your brother in the town you live in that you didn't know lived here for 18 years. But his art style is one I love. I love collage work probably more than any other kind of formal work on canvas or on paper. And I really am happy here to be with this gentleman this afternoon. We're going to talk about his journey as an artist, his vision, his relationships to children, and how he portrays them, and the joy and the mystery of mischief that you can find in looking at the children that he does in his artwork. We're going to talk about this series in depth this afternoon. This is Dr. Orin Carpenter.
Thank you.
So I want to start with this series of paintings all around us here, this particular series, because this is your current work, right?
Correct, yes. And it's called Finding Freedom, the Absence of Purpose. And we're actually going to kind of start more recent, and then we'll work our way back. And I want to preface that because you'll kind of see the evolution, even the subject matter. And the reason I'm focusing on kids, it's always, as an artist, you always tap into and reflect kind of the inner part of you. You know, you build from what you've experienced, what you've lived. And so even as a kid, remembering how when I first learned that I was different and my difference. And so I want to kind of share that experience because I think we all can kind of go back to that time to where we all felt. That's the beauty of community. Regardless, we all felt different at one point in time. And so this is kind of my experience. And finding that freedom as a kid when you're trying to find your identity, you're trying to find out who you are with everything that's around you, you don't realize that you actually have a purpose. And so that's why the subtitle is Absence of Purpose, because it's just a matter of finding who I am, finding that freedom that I'm starting to learn about, and doing it even at a young age, especially a young boy of color, realizing that I had to kind of think about adult things as a kid. And so that's what this series kind of stems from.
Okay, so the commonality we have is children of military background. We were both raised on military bases. We were like I was one of 5 black families in France, and then there were more families in Germany, and then we moved to New Mexico. You had that same experience where your family was one of the 3 or 4 on the base.
Well, not on the base. It was actually in a neighborhood. Oh. So my father was actually Air Force, first wave Vietnam. And so after getting out, we actually moved to a suburb. And so the commonality that we had there was we were actually one of 4 families, probably out of 1,000, a new subdivision in Memphis, Tennessee. And so that's where that experience started and stemmed from that area.
Right. And so you were raised in a neighborhood and you played with kids of every color.
Correct, yes. Yeah.
That's what I grew up with, too.
Mm-hmm.
And it changes, I don't have an experience any other way. My
Right.
best friend in first grade was Melinda Redmond, chocolate brown girl. My best friend in 3rd grade was a girl named Melody Player, and she was Italian. Okay, so my experience with children was we played hard.
Yeah.
That's what we did. We
Right.
played hard.
Right, that's it.
That's
yeah.
what it wasn't about what color you were, you played hard. And every once in a while you'd get buffeted up against, oh, you're that kind of kid, and then everybody would look at that kid and then we'd go back to playing.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was that constant hearing that
Yes.
is when it then started to resonate, and then it started to sink in, and then you started to question like, why is this being said? Why is this kid different? And unfortunately, even as an educator, the first thing we talk about is, I just remember, to kind of go back, I remember there was and some of you might remember this, there was actually a billboard that had a little African-American boy and a little white boy in the sandbox and said, they only see friends until we as adults make them see color. And so even in that, the beauty of it is, again, as a society, we kind of go from one extreme to the next. We say, oh, we're colorblind. No, we should see each other's color, because that's the beauty. I'm an artist. Don't tell me not to see color. Right? I love monochromatic, but we need a little bit of color. So with that is teaching everyone the beauty in their difference. And that's why I always started with that. I had wonderful parents, father and mother, who told me that I didn't need to put anyone else down in order to lift myself up. And it was about love who I am, right? Let that show and let that shine. And regardless if they don't appreciate that difference, that's their problem, not mine. However, as a kid, here finding that freedom, it's easy to say as adults because we have the tools to deal with that. But as kids, they don't. And that's where the things kind of
And as kids today, they have fewer tools because kids don't ride the bikes through town anymore.
No.
And they don't play unsupervised any longer.
Yeah.
You settled a lot of stuff on the playing ground. Just play, somebody cheated you out of your basketball game or took the ball or whatever. You settled it out there yourselves. But children are not allowed to be unsupervised any longer. They don't have the freedom we had. And that's a big deal.
Yeah.
I think it's a big link in happiness, just laying out in the middle of a field looking at the flowers, or without anybody watching you enjoy yourself, okay? So there's a link missing today, which is unfortunate because people always worry that their children are going to disappear. Well, that's not necessarily going to happen, okay? But it could. I'm just saying that's missing. Today, that's missing. So I want to talk about this painting in particular behind you.
Yeah.
For me, it is a radio flyer. Well, we tied sails on it in New Mexico trying to, take the surf down the street, right?
Yes, yeah. Well, this piece is actually called The Journey, and this was the actual piece that is the first piece of this new series, Finding Freedom. And there's a few points I want to talk about why I actually went to this. After doing a few series, and we'll kind of talk about the series where I was dealing more with my status where I am now as a middle-aged man. Wow, that sounded weird. As a middle-aged man, the experience that I was blessed to have, and then it made me think back, being an educator for 18 years, kind of thinking back as the mind of a child and even my mind as a child, understanding how the world is similar to those things there. And so what I wanted to do with this piece was talk about a lot of different things. We know that America is the land of the free. It's the land that everyone actually immigrates or migrates to come to because of the opportunities that are here. And so what I wanted to do was actually play around with some of the things here. And is it okay if I turn to kind of point? Okay, make sure, right? So just to kind of walk you all through it, if you notice in this series, and these are just 2 pieces of I think right now I have a total of 15, you'll see some commonalities in all these pieces. Some other things have changed, but you'll see the sky and the clouds. If you notice, they're like Dr. Seuss clouds, kid clouds, very friendly, joyous, kid-like. And then you have your straight blue sky. The color is going to change, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then you'll also begin to see neighborhoods in a lot of these pieces. Now, what you can't see for those in the far back, this is actually a blend of neighborhoods. It's from different areas. You have some from the inner city in Mexico, in China, in America. And so even though there are different locations, it's still the same class status, right? Lower middle or lower class. And so that's kind of this created neighborhood that's here in America. Now, we're quick to say ghettos, but I don't want to even go to that extreme. And then at the top corner, we have the Capitol building, and what a lot of you can't see there is actually a photo of the insurrection. And we understand that the insurrection, regardless of how we feel about it, some people felt the reason that they did this was because they wanted freedom, right? They wanted to kind of change the government and how they were actually doing things based on their political choice. And then when you look at these 4 boys, they're all from different ethnic groups, all young kids coming together, all having the same purpose, is to find that freedom and find their purpose. And how they're going to do this is try to escape and find the road to freedom, which you see kind of behind the neighborhood there. It's very ambiguous. It just says freedom. It doesn't point which way. It's just behind the buildings, and it's kind of this point of you actually kind of have to find that freedom. But in order for them to get there, leaving the neighborhoods that they're at, they have to go through this field. And this is where some of the subtleties that I like to do in my work, especially collage work, my goal, just to do a sidebar, my goal is to have people actually come in and look at it. Look at it, research. It's kind of like a scavenger hunt. That's why I love mixed media. We're all layered. We all have layers. It's peeling back the onions, right? So I want you to come in a little closer. And what I always love about my work, and I'm probably jumping ahead, I want people to leave my work with dialogue. Not necessarily about my work, just dialogue. Just people talking. Even if it's something from the piece to start this conversation, because that's something we don't have. Eye to eye, face to face is conversation. So these boys are leaving this neighborhood, and they're actually going through a field, and that's a field of posies. Does that ring a bell with anyone? Okay. For those who it doesn't ring a bell, notice that right now, out of the grass, there is a golden road. So we think of the Wizard of Oz. And so the field of posies is where Dorothy and her crew, right, were trying to get to Oz, and that's where they became sleepy. When we think about us in this world today, a lot of things kind of make us sleepy. Not in a literal sense, but just in our thinking, in our connection, and a lot of those things. And so these young 4 boys decided to fight through and make their way through that. Now, the leader here, he's actually holding a lantern, and that lantern actually is not an actual light, but because of my faith, it's actually one of my favorite scriptures, which is Jeremiah 29:11, where it says, "For I know the plans I have for you." So for these 4 boys, that's the light that's actually leading them to their freedom. And each boy, if you notice, something that I have in a lot of my pieces, and you can see here in this gentleman here, the African-American boys, because again, as African-Americans, we don't really know our heritage because it was actually cut off and destroyed in the Middle Passage. So I have these tribal marks, just very ambiguous tribal marks, but just to kind of connect them with Africa, right, the homeland. But I also wanted to find a way, how can I do it for these boys of Latino descent, of South Pacific descent, Asian descent? How can I find tribal marks? And I didn't want to dive too deep in that yet. So what I decided to do was have something that's connected to their culture, which is fabric, which is clothing, which is patterns and these things. So each boy is actually wearing something of their homeland. And so now all of them bring their identity of who they are, not compromising or who they are, the integrity of who they are, but bringing that with them as they all search for freedom in their own right. So there's the journey.
Thank you. going to talk about this painting as well. This one here. This one is called Eracism. Tell me about this one.
So the actual piece is Talk to the Hand. I know y'all remember that. And so it's kind of a play on that. But if you notice, written in his hand is hate. And this is a universal sign for what? So it's stop hate. And again, coming from a young boy who, when you think about it, this isn't a conversation that this young boy should be having or leading. But because of the world we live in, our children, our kids, are really the ones who are taking the mantle and reminding us of how we should be and who we should be. And so this piece is him actually taking a stand of saying stop hate and eracism. I love T-shirts. I know my wife is like, oh, yes, he does. I have plenty of T-shirts. I love T-shirts. And so, again, that's that connection to that boyish charm, right? Being a young boy is having that T-shirt, but on there, eracism. I love that quote. I've seen that for years, and I just love that. And I just wanted to add that on there, again, him being a catalyst for that. But one thing you'll notice about a lot of my pieces, and especially when I started with the series Endangered Species, dealing with boys of color, I wanted to take the play on the stereotype that we all look alike. And so what I wanted to do was take features from a lot of different African-American men and create one face. Because when you look at it, it looks distorted, right? That's what I love about collage. And Romare Bearden, for those who don't know who that is one of my favorite artists, Romare Bearden. And so I wanted to incorporate that in there because even though you can notice that it's different features, we don't look alike, however, we still have some commonality. And that's probably the experience and struggles that we might have. And then the last point, of course, is the crown, Jean-Michel Basquiat, one of my favorite artists. That's something that's trending again. The youth love his work because it speaks to him. And so just that universal aspect that he is a young king, just having to grow into his crown. And so that's that piece.
Beautiful. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, for me, what it is that you took on the story of children because they have so many possibilities, and we have to give them all the possibilities we can. And the limitations are based on old ways. They're based on old ways. And so the other piece that you don't have here today, because it's downtown, is called Slave to the Game.
Yes.
Slave to the Game is a piece about a young man who is in a line with a series of other young men, and he's got a chain attached to him. And for me, it's about ball, playing baseball, playing football, playing basketball, and how it's a trick, how sports really are a trick. I mean, 251 kids get to play in the NFL out of 1 million that try every year. 1 million, okay? 252. So they get into the leagues, and they are in the leagues, and they're linemen for 4 years. On the 4th year, the managers decide, let's go to that lunch, and they've got all those linemen in front of them, and they trade them because on the 5th year of major National League football, you can't get vested, and you won't have any kind of benefits, and you'll get lower pay because you got traded. That's football, okay? Sports are interesting, and we're all invested in the 49ers and the Giants and everything, but there's a toll that happens with that game. And that's what that painting meant for me.
Yeah, and it was a double meaning because I actually was highly recruited for basketball.
Of course you were.
Yes, but unfortunately, because of my learning difference, I wasn't a great academic student. And that was the first year in 1986 is when I graduated. That's when they first had the standardized testing with the ACT and SATs, where athletes had to have a certain score with a certain GPA. And depending on the school that you went to, I went to a public school in Memphis, Tennessee, to where it's like, grades, it's okay, you're an athlete. Just get us to where we need to go. I couldn't take tests well. And the issue was all the 17 offers that I had, they decided, well, we can find something better because, and I think Sports Illustrated actually did a write-up on this where 1986 was that trial year, and they did it in the middle of our senior year. So we didn't even have time to try to figure out how to adjust. And so a lot of athletes, I think even in the 90s, that's when Sports Illustrated said that the NBA, especially the NBA, you could tell the transition. That was a transition with Larry Bird and Magic, where they wanted them to stay in a little bit longer with Jordan because there was a void in that space, and they realized that it was basically because of the change would happen. Now, who's to say that change, actually, it did need to happen. It's just how it happened, right? Because I think at the time, junior colleges were missing out on athletes because why? They weren't going. They wanted to go to these D1 schools. So it's a business. That's the thing. So for that piece, sorry to get long-winded, that piece was actually about me because growing up, having the wonderful parents that I did, knew about these traps, knew about that, knew about these percentages. My dad constantly told me, you need to have a plan B, C, D, E, F. But because of my desire in a kid, I was good. I'm like, I'm going to beat the odds. So even though the title is Slave to the Game, the question I have, and I have a question mark with that, is a slave to the game because it was by choice or by force? Because a lot of athletes do know these statistics.
Yes.
But they say, you know what, I'm not going to be that one statistic. So it becomes this choice until afterwards you realize, oh, I guess not. And so, yes, that piece is dear to me because, again, kind of my walk. And on that piece, hopefully, and I apologize for not having it, but on the piece you talked about the bondage. The main character does have chains on, but they're broken. Yep. So it just shows evidence that he once was chained to the game, but now he's free, and the choice is still his. And in the shadows, you actually see shadows of the line of ball players going onto this bus. Their shadows actually have them holding basketballs, but the shadows actually have chains. Yeah. And then the bus that they're actually getting on is the Greyhound, but there's a year on this bus, it's 1747. That was a famous slave ship. It's called the Greyhound. And so that piece, again, is by choice or by force that you're choosing to get on this bus. So
the interesting part about that was I saw it first at Open, D. Young Open. 883 artists from the Bay Area, paintings from every walk of life. That show was, I would say, fresh, alive, of the moment, right now. The art was amazing. It was children. It was graphic. It was abstract. It was meaningful. It was photographic. It was landscape. It was everything. And you walk in, and there's Orin right there. Number 47, right? Something like that.
4730. I'm looking at my crew.
It was a low number. Yeah,
She's like, yeah, something like that.
It was an amazing.
It was, yes.
It was an amazing show.
It was.
And so that's
yes.
where I first saw that piece. And I think that was probably one of the best art experiences ever. You couldn't see it once unless you spent like an 8-hour day there because, if you thought it was abstract and you walked up and you found out it was all little paint chips from a thing that they've cut out intricately and made like a design from. It was crazy. It was great. But that's where I first saw that.
Yeah, and I'm so honored to be a part of that. And they did such an excellent job because the Bay Area, and I knew that before moving here, the artist and the art scene here. And to me, I know I'm a fan of New York art, but just saying. I mean, really, here on the West, especially Northern California, I'm not even talking Southern California, the artist here is amazing because every year, the first year, and I've been honored to be in for 2 years in a row. The first year, I think they had a total of 10,000 submissions. This year, they had a total of 12,000 submissions. Yep. And what I love what they say is it's harder because
there's
so much good work. And that just speaks to, and again, those are the artists who knew to submit. You still had a huge percentage who didn't know, didn't want to. So again, the art scene here is just so amazing. So for me to be a part of that show, it was humbling and definitely grateful and appreciative of being a part of that.
It was amazing. And my favorite part was going to the gift shop and buying some of your postcards.
That was another honor. Yes, yes. My piece was actually one of the 10 I think that they chose to actually sell for postcards, and the proceeds actually went to their art education, which I love. It's giving back to the arts and educating. So that was an honor in
Well,
itself.
the D Young is really trying very hard to be the place. And it's not like the Oakland Museum doesn't exist or anything, but they've taken a different path. They now have interpreters that will walk with you through the galleries, ask you if you want to talk about a painting now. So I've watched this happen over time. And it's really great that that's happened. So we're going to talk about some more of your art today.
All right. I
Let's
might have to.
stage.
So this first piece, and this is actually a series. So just to let you all know, I actually do my work now in series. Beforehand, as I was trying to find my artistic identity, being a graphic designer for over 15 years, not truly understanding the difference between working outside in or inside out. And I'll talk about that, some I learned in college. But I would just kind of create pieces. And so now I understand the cohesiveness. And again, these series started after COVID, and I might be jumping ship a little bit, but COVID-19, where we all had to do a lot of reflection, had to figure things out. And even as an artist, I had to figure out what I wanted to say. And on top of that, of course, the atrocity that we all experienced was George Floyd being murdered on TV, and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. And so something I always felt as an artist that, yes, you can do art for art's sake, which is beautiful, but I feel as an artist we have an obligation. I guess that comes from me being an educator too, is we all have a moment to where we can teach each other. And so as an artist, I have a vehicle to where I can challenge, educate, elevate, and inspire. That's kind of my tag with my work. And so as I tried to figure out, and that incident happened, I said, I can't just do art for art's sake anymore. Now, I've always had social consciousness in my work, but to the extreme to where I felt it was a little safe. And I say that because as artists, you might hear some artists that say, oh, I don't care about my work selling. They're not honest. Oh, I don't care about the fame. Mm-hmm. Wink, wink. No, you do. But to the extent for me, I can say, yes, I would love that. But again, the purpose is I want to have these conversations. It's the conversations, and unfortunately, it's a touchy subject. We won't stay on it. But we live in a country that has these beautiful tragedies. And I say that because that's what it is. It's tragic. Our history is tragic. But it's beautiful because that's how we got here. You can't take the sunshine and not have the rain. We have to be honest about that. But they're at a point to where they're still hiding it. In fact, now you got certain states, won't say any names, you got certain states that want to actually eliminate real history. That's a problem for me. So this is what I want to have. So this series is actually called The Fractured Soul. And it's based on the trauma that we all witness. And as a black man having to deal with that, having to see that. And I remember the conversation with some of my friends to where a lot of them work in Fortune 500 companies to where they were probably one or two of 500 employees there that were of color. And after seeing that, the question was, how can I go back to work and be okay? And so it's kind of dealing with that aspect. Something they did for years, but again, because of this experience, it's like, how do I see it? Because we saw things differently. And so this piece is actually it's actually about the trauma bringing what I experienced out, which was hard. Because I was trying to bring together both that design element and abstract fine art element. And so real quick to talk about that bridge. In school, I was taught that you can either be a graphic artist or a fine artist. You couldn't be both. And I didn't understand. And they said the reason being is because a graphic artist works from the outside in, right? Because why? He's creating work to sell product, right? Consumerism. A fine artist works from the inside out. It's about emotion, experience, and you're wanting people to feel that experience. I now kind of understood that. And so this was that, trying to bring both worlds, because I've done it for so long. I didn't know how to do one without the other.
Well,
and so
that's your tools.
That's my tools.
Right. And for me, I didn't go to school for art, so I didn't know there was rules.
Right. Which was good.
I never knew that. I knew that I didn't want to get an art degree because I didn't want to have to deal with all of the formal limitations that I experienced just briefly in college in art classes. and I saw it as a trap that, depending on the art teacher
Right.
and how they felt about your work, and then being judged about your work. Now, I taught kids art for years. We never judged work. All we did was talked about the color that you used and how you designed the piece. So your limitations were based on your education. And then you broke out and made this.
Yeah.
So this is the first in this series?
Yes, it is. It is. And this one is called phlegmatic, which means you're just basically kind of what we heard as called the cool pose, not letting people know how you're truly feeling. And this one is called rage. And you can actually see it in the action. And again, taking different pieces, similar to what I talked about with these pieces, taking different body parts of men of color. And this series, actually, there are some of my features in this too. So the first one, you probably saw that was my eye, if you didn't notice that in the first one. And so I kind of use myself in some of these pieces as well. And you can keep going. And a lot of these pieces, you'll see a lot of the movement in the color, again, because color represents mood, emotion, and trying to replicate the feeling. This one is called self-doubt. And in this piece, if you notice, all of them were distorted, but I really distorted the face of this gentleman here. You can actually see the eye and top of the lip, but then I kind of painted the base lip, the nose, and even the eye, and I kind of distorted the face because, again, self-doubt of how I look, how people see me. And that's what this piece was. This is an extension of the series Bridges and Wall that I did at Marin MoCA. I actually did an art residency there probably 3 years ago. And this piece is actually, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Allentown, California? Okay. So the history of that, whereas an African-American, I think he was a general or a lieutenant in the Army, saved enough money and bought this little town. It was one of the few actually black-owned towns in America. And during the time, in the 1800s, Memphis, where I'm from, Memphis Massacre, 1866, same thing happened in this town to where you had whites who actually came in and murdered and killed the members of that town and took the land. And so the title of this is This Was My Land. And again, you having kind of the Black Power fist with the barbed wire, which is another element that I have in a lot of my work because it symbolizes oppression. And then we have actual stripes of the actual flag. But some of you can see it back there, but in the background you see hoods of the KKK, kind of in the clouds in the background. But what you really can't see here is actually bodies that's actually in the water. That's just kind of, it's subtle and it's faint in that from the torture that happened in that land. This is a tribute to my grandfather. His name was Papa John, John Henry. We called him Papa John. He was a sharecropper, World War II vet, and he basically had 9 kids, and being a sharecropper, he actually was able to put 7 of his 9 kids through college. So education was big on that side of the family is why I have it. And 7 of those 9 kids are educators. I guess I was meant to be a teacher. So anyway, but this, I just remember the stories because I love talking to Papa John when I would go visit. And I just remember one story that he talked about because my mom was the middle child to where there was moments where his older boys and daughters were in college, and it was kind of my mom and her younger siblings. And of course, living back then, you had to walk miles to go to a store, convenience store. And there was a moment to where Papa John wouldn't allow my mom or the younger kids to go because there was a time to where he was out in the fields and he actually saw his neighbor, one of his neighbors who was actually lynched and body was on the side. So he actually experienced some of the things that we heard. And so in the back here, you see a tree. It's actually a silhouette of a person being hung while they had to just go about life as it was. And so it's kind of bringing in the new with the old. Here's a portrait of me when I had hair. Yes, I had hair at one time. And so, of course, I just remember in the 70s where we had the Afro pick, the 60s and the 70s, say it loud. And I just remember those combs that we had to pick our fros out as big as they could be. And we always had it in the back of our hair, but again, with the American flag, because again, it's that symbol of saying, I am an American, whether you believe it or not. So, and this piece is called Neighborhood Watch. this goes back to my experience, to where we were one of 4 black families, and I just remember my experience when I was actually walking our dog around the block, when my mom finally said that I could actually walk our dog around the block by myself without my older brother. I just remember experiencing, as I walked, I kept hearing this voice calling me certain names like porch monkey, jungle bunny, all of these different things as I walked. Couldn't see the person because it was coming out of the window. And then eventually end up seeing that kid, which is another story, finally. But this piece also reminded me of Norman Rockwell, who is one of my favorite artists. I think it's Moving Day or The Neighborhood. Moving Day. I'm getting confused with mine. And so it's when a black family moved into the neighborhood, but that interaction was so much beautiful because that's who Norman Rockwell was, right? This, not so much. And so here, this is how, when we moved into our area in East Memphis, it was kind of undeveloped at the time. This is how I kind of felt in that neighborhood. So this piece was a tribute to Norman Rockwell and to my experience moving into that neighborhood.
Yeah, see, when I moved in a neighborhood, it was moving from New Mexico, where New Mexico had 800,000 people in the state, and I moved to North Carolina. The year after, my high school was integrated. Well, I didn't know that when I moved there. I'm moving from New Mexico, where I live in a small town, Alamogordo, armpit of the universe. And now it's where the space, the space thing, the
Space Force?
Space Force, thank you. I can't make this up.
Yeah.
The Space Force is in Alamogordo, okay? So when I lived there, there was about 11,000 people, but there was an air base there. So I moved to North Carolina. They've integrated my high school the year before. I've already been in integrated schools my whole life because I'm a military kid. So we get to North Carolina, and my experience was we have this football team. And this is the first year, and the team is about 2/3 black, and all the cheerleaders are white. And they won't let the black girls that want to be cheerleaders even try out.
Wow.
There was a walkout from the school. All colors walked out from the school that day.
Wow.
Black and white walked out. And the next week there were 5 black girls and 5 white girls as cheerleaders.
Wow. Wow.
Okay? I'm still, when I go back there now, I'm still that girl. Oh, you're that girl that hung out with the white girl all those years, right? Still my best friend. She lives here now, but yeah. So what I found living in the neighborhood was that we had a lot of different kinds of families there. And it wasn't black and white. It was everything. There was a Japanese family up the street. But it was all military related because I lived at Fort Bragg, Fayetteville, North Carolina, home of the 82nd Airborne. 200,000 guys were there. This is Vietnam time. And so it was very, very, very different. And there were kids that would get high on their horse and call names, and then they'd get thrown off the playground sometime. So depending on how things were going that day.
Right. And that's all part of that too. And so even with that experience, again, this is where going back to these pieces of these kids having to deal with adult situations, it's one of those where then, of course, you're not thinking that it's a benefit. I know even saying that now, people are like, how is that a benefit? Well, it helps mold who you are, and that's why for me, understanding, right? Being proud of my difference and not having to put someone else down because of their difference, but appreciating us because of that human nature. As we say, Christian anthropology, to where everyone is created in the image of God, everyone. And so loving them for that, and that's the thing, so.
Right.
Yeah.
My mother was always about having self-respect and not allowing that not to be important to another person. So that I was always respected, and if we had an issue, ask my former employers, then we would have an issue, okay?
Yeah.
But self-respect was everything.
Right. Yeah. So this next one that we're about to come up with is called Embodiment. And this, again, was actually the first series before The Fractured Soul, because this dealt with a lot of the mental anguish that not only Americans have, but especially black men, that they really didn't share. Because, again, I think all men, regardless of color, right, especially growing up 60s, 70s, where as a man, you're not supposed to share your feelings or say how you feel or say if you're,
Or
dealing
show-
with things.
show any feelings.
Or show any feelings, exactly. And so just all of that together, this is called displaced complexity. So it's just kind of dealing with the different kind of aspects. And again, me trying to bring mixed media and my abstract expressionism into one piece. So this series was really experimental because that was a challenge, trying to bring that. And I think the next few pieces going on. This is called PTSD. But it's more about post-traumatic stereotype disorder because of the stereotype. And if you notice, I focus in on the what? The nose. Because as an African-American male, we talk about nose, which was funny because even growing up in school, they're like, well, your nose isn't wide. I was like, oh, I didn't know we were all supposed to have a wide nose. Talk to my parents. I don't have anything to do with that. So, but yeah, and then this piece here was actually the piece, this was the first piece chosen for the DeYoung Open exhibit. And this was from the series that I created after the George Floyd incident. This series was called Endangered Species. And just to talk about the title, I remember Chris Rock was in an interview, and I think the commentator asked and said, so do you feel that African-American men or black men are endangered species? And Chris Rock, being Chris Rock, said, well, no, because endangered species are protected by the government. So I was like, wow. I'm titling this series Endangered Species. So, but just to kind of think about that, because unfortunately, what we saw, right, from the phone calls to Ahmaud Arbery just jogging through a neighborhood, all of these things to where this piece is called Can You Hear Me Now? And it was based off us after those incidents of saying, I'm not okay. As a black man, I'm not okay. Going into work, I'm not okay. And this was the piece that says, sick and tired. And it's something that I remember my parents always said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. Yep, we all know that. So this piece has multiple things. I'm going to try to go through it quickly, but this was actually not the first piece, but actually I think the last of that first half of that series that I did. And this is where I actually came up with the image of using the different faces because of the stereotype. And you notice that he's screaming through a megaphone. And in this megaphone is actually the sheet music to We Shall Overcome, which we know was sung by Dr. King in the march. Well, this generation said we're not singing it anymore. We're proclaiming it. And so that's what the megaphone is saying. We're not asking, we're shouting it, we're saying it. And again, having the connection with the tribal marks, with the kente cloth, again, just more universal connection to that. You see Dr. King here, and I have Dr. King because such a genius in dealing with the civil rights and really study his strategy with that. A lot of people just, I don't really think they understand how shrewd Dr. King was in this movement. It's something to study. I think schools should study that. But anyway, notice the number 6 because that's the day that man was created, was on the 6th day. Here we have the KKK with horns in Dr. King's ear. I have police officers because, unfortunately, during that time, and this is something we do in this country, we like to broad stroke everything. So again, we know that we have a police system that was created due to capturing runaway slaves. That's kind of the foundation of the police force and police system. But we tend to say all police officers are bad, and that's not true. And especially as a man of color, if I don't want everyone to say that I'm a criminal, I can't say that all police are bad. So we have to watch our language. And so in this piece, you'll notice that I have some police officers, you have to get up close where they have a halo. Some might have horns, meaning that it's the individual, right? It's not the collective. And here, there's actually a protest. And what I love about it, I also minored in photography in college. And what I love about photos is they can capture time that we could never experience, especially if they do it right. And here, I actually have 3 marches, protests going on. Dr. King, when he gave I Have a Dream speech, Selma, and then also with the March for George Floyd. But it all looks like it's one. So that's that juxtaposition of, we've come so far, but yet some of the things are the same. And that's, I kind of wanted to seamlessly kind of blend that to show that we're kind of still dealing with issues that we dealt with back then. And again, this is the lotus flower, right? And instead of the sun, I had that there to talk about change that's going to come. So. And this one is from that series as well. This is called Hood Tendencies. This was my first tribute to Trayvon Martin. And I remember the conversation because my son, who will be 21 this summer, he actually loved hoodies. And I remember talking with some of my friends and church members. We talked about, even as black men, how we were worried about our sons wearing hoodies. And it's sad that I actually have to have a conversation with my son about an article of clothing to say, hey, when you're in a certain place, do not have your hood on your head. Make sure they can actually see your face. And I remember having that conversation with a friend of mine who was not of color and talked about it and said, wow, that's something that I don't even have to have a discussion with my kid. There are some similarities that we all have, but it's just that extra step. So this was a dedication to him. And I didn't speak about this earlier, but I have this that I added, this distorted outline of another face. That's just representing basically what was really going on inside. Notice again a calm structure here, kind of an angered face. This piece was dedicated to women, and it's called Incandescence, and it's talking about the light that women have from their strength. This was dedicated to my mother and my wife, and the women who were in my life, and especially women of color. Women in general, but women of color, because I watched my grandmother, my mom, both my grandmothers, and I just watched how the struggles that they dealt with, how they dealt with it in a different way. They still had this grace about them, even though inside it was really tearing them up what they were experiencing, but their whole goal was being the matriarch. They had to make sure that the kids didn't sense what was going on. And so what I did was I actually took women of different ethnic groups in this series and had within them some of the struggles that they dealt with. And I wanted to put it in their bodies and cover it because, again, it was internal. They kept it there in the same place that they had that light that actually comes out from them. And so, again, you see the barbed wire, but notice that the barbed wire is part of their body, right? The oppression. We live in a society that's male-dominated. So not just dealing with color, but now we're dealing with class, we're dealing with gender. So it's all of these things that they take in, but yet still have a grace about themselves when they're out. And so that was a dedication to them. There might be one more. Oh, a couple of more, two more. This one was based on, and it's something that a lot of people didn't realize, but I think over the past 3 years, indigenous women here in the States, I think 3,000 of them are missing.
It's more than that.
It's more now. Because when I did this piece, it was 3,000. No one knew about it.
Yeah.
No one talked about it. It's not on the news. So they started a movement of red paint over the mouths, the silence of the fact that this blood is not spoken about. And the numbers are constantly climbing, and yet we still don't hear anything about it. And so it was a dedication to them. And then last but not least, same thing here, Vietnam, dealing with what the struggle they had there. And I love the gold hat, gold foil I wanted to use for the royalty. And I tried to, in every woman in this piece, have that gold there for their royalty of who they are. And so this is just in dedication to them. I also wanted to pick a flower. Each one had a different flower that symbolizes their culture. Again, just trying to find that connection as I'm researching, because that's the beauty of being an artist. It's not just settling, right? I love research. I love history. I love trying to find out these things. And so trying to vet and find these connections is something that I wanted to have with each piece. And then this piece is called Calm Before the Storm. This series was Quarantine State of Mind. It was created during COVID. As an artist trying to figure it out. And I didn't really want to do these pieces. I did this series before I started the Endangered Species series because mentally I couldn't go there to deal with that social consciousness because it was so heavy. So I had to find a way, how can I stay sane in this time as we all were enclosed? I hate being inside. I have to move around. So this was torture for me, especially as an artist, but it helped me create this piece to where I decided to do a series and do it on a square canvas. I don't like square canvases. It just feels weird to me, sorry. Same way with symmetry. I love asymmetric, off to the side instead of right in the center and a balance, right? So I wanted to do that because I wanted us to all feel how we felt in our homes. I wanted you to feel confined. That's why you see a lot of movement going on. There's in some of these pieces where you have this element of escape or this blank space to kind of help free your mind, that space there, right? Because we needed that, but that's what this series was about. You notice you see the 19 in there for COVID-19, right?
So what I did at that time was called, I did a whole series of gods and goddesses, and it was all about the different ones, what they meant. So Prometheus, he gave us humanity, or served humanity. Icarus, the boy who flew too close to the sun. Cassandra, who's my favorite, because all women are shadow Cassandras. You know, every woman in this room has not been believed by some man at one point in their life. Raise your hand if that's not true. Okay, so, and also Sisyphus, because Sisyphus for me was the king who tried to trick the gods twice. So he was forever banished to having to take that stone up the hill and then go back down the hill and up the hill. And for me, that represented everything that is unreasonably greedy and unconsciously cruel in society today. So at my house, these are big kinetic sculptures. And on that one in particular, I have a piece of extra wire and a rock tied to it because I want to tilt it the other way at this point. I think that he needs to just not be able to go back up the hill, okay? He's just stuck. He can't go back up again. Purgatory is where he belongs, okay? So 19 was a really hard time for most people. We all got stuck.
Yeah.
And my backyard was my savior.
Yeah.
Yeah, it became not a yard, but an oasis.
Yes, same for, yes, yeah.
Sanctuary.
Yes.
Yeah.
But you know what? Even though, again, I believe in one of my favorite scriptures is Romans 8:28, all things work for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. When we think about our lives, even those traumas that we went through, not to take away from the pain that they created, not to take away from those moments, but the fact that we're here now being able to look back. I remember Papa John, my grandfather, who I talked about, they would ask how he's doing. He said, man, if you're around to complain, that means it's a good day. Right? But when you think about, for us, a lot happened. As an artist, that was actually the best time for me. Because in 2013, I wasn't going to create any more art. I kind of got tired of going through this, right? Because again, not that was the only reason I created art, but I knew my work is something that people didn't want to hear. If the tragedies that happened didn't happen, I always ask myself, would people want to even see my art? Would people even want to talk about it? But you made the art in response to everything that was happening exactly.
At that moment.
That was the next thing. So as an artist, I had to grow. So when you look at this time, again, us really looking at it, for me as an artist, it grew. Art grew because now people who once loved, who wrote music, wrote poems, who read, who did all these things, they had to find themselves going back to that because you couldn't do anything else. So it's like, what can I do to take up this time, right? Read, musicians. It's a lot of musicians in here, right? It's a lot of actors in here. It's a lot of people, art has been a part of their life. I guarantee if you did a survey, probably 98.9%, I'm an artist, not a mathematician, they would say because of COVID, I actually revisited the artistic side of me.
I made the best art ever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did because I couldn't leave home.
Right, you had to sit there.
I just had to do something.
Yes.
And also, I think this is probably the most amazing time right now in art. There's more art happening now than ever. Why? Because these are uncertain times. It's an uneasy thing. And also, we want to leave a mark on this planet to say, at this time, this is what was going on. This is the only thing that is left on the earth that says humans were here. Art is the only thing that's left. I talked about this last week. Queen Puabi's headpiece. That was from, between the Euphrates and that's thousands of years old. They found this woman's crown. This says that a woman lived, and she was a queen a long time ago. Pyramids are here, the big heads of South in Mexico, Central Mexico. There's so much art that tells our stories, and without these little signs left behind, where will we be down the road? So for me, art it's the voice of humanity. That's what art is for me. So when I like to tell a story, it's based on, of course, my experience.
Right.
And how I feel about things.
Right.
So you talk about May 25th, 2020. That was the same day that Christian Cooper was walking through the park. And that's also my birthday, okay?
Wow.
I was really spun out that day. So I made a thing called the Bird Watcher. And it was May 24th, 2020, and May 26th, 2020. Christian Cooper, he just went on with his life. He never looked back. He went back to the bramble the next day. Because you have to keep focused on not someone else's situation.
Right.
It's not about you. It was never about him.
Right.
So that was a really tough year for all of us.
Right.
And I think that we get what we get as humans on this planet. We get the good, we get the disease, we get the happiness, we get the joy every day. So you have to make something of your situation all the time.
Right.
Tell us about this.
This is just another piece here. This is called the new normal after COVID, right? And here we are 4 or 5 years afterwards. We're still trying to figure out what is that, right? The new normal, which I always had a problem with that word anyway, normal.
Me too.
I did.
Well,
Maybe because I knew I wasn't normal, but I did. So this was it. And you see the 19, it's like still trying to figure it out, right? And the white space is a symbol of control, right? To where this is how things should be, right? As man, we keep trying to control how things should be and showing how, we can't control all things. We can control how we respond, but we can't control all things, so. And this is just another one. This one, I don't even know what this one's called. I don't even think I came up with a title for this one, but it was during that time. It was 19. Yep.
Still?
Yeah. So, you know what? I think that was, sorry, before you go there, I think this was actually the first one. Yes, because I'm looking at the energy in it.
Right.
Yeah, I was really having a bad day. Yeah, that's the first one. Yeah, I was feeling quarantine and COVID then. Yeah.
So now we reach the heart throb of.
Yes. So I had chance, for those who don't know, I'm actually an educator at Marin Catholic High School, and I was over the art department for about 17 years, and we have this new immersion mission trip where we were able to take students, to Paris, France, and there's Mikhail went with me, and there's my co-buddy, my friend, also librarian, Miss Kate Zomacona there. And we actually took kids to Paris, and I love Claude Monet. And so I actually had a chance to go to his estate and to be there and to walk on that estate. The bridge. Oh, yes, sat there for a minute and to see the pond where the water lilies was created. I hate this term, and just me, so don't judge, when they say it's magical, because it's overused.
No, it is magical.
That was magical, because you can't describe being in that space. And what people don't realize, they talk about his paintings, but his best masterpiece was that garden.
Yes.
He actually it took 20 years for him to create this garden. And so any bucket list for everyone here, if you can, not just go see the Eiffel Tower, but no, the Eiffel Tower is beautiful, but it does not compare to Claude Monet's home where he raised 10 kids, all of them weren't his, to see the family man, to walk through this home, just to be in that space. You do not want to leave. So if you haven't gone, put that on the bucket list. Woman's trip, guy's trip, something, go. So this is dedication to him because, again, I'm not an impressionist. I'm impressed by impressionist artists because it's scientific what they do. What people don't realize, impressionist artists paint by the way that your eyes truly see color. Right. See, right now, because of how the body works, we see forms and figures, but we don't realize that they're just trillions of pixels. That's how they paint. that's why you see these brushstrokes and these movements, because, and people are like, well, did they finish it? Yeah, they finished it. They're actually painting in the true vision of how we see it. I knew I couldn't do that. So, of course, I decided that I want to do a requiem to Claude Monet in my style, how I experienced it, how I felt, without compromising my artwork and who I was. So this is just one of the pieces of the water lilies, and we were able to stay there for a few hours to where I could catch the sun, the light changing, because I always heard about that, and we actually experienced that, and it was kind of an overcast. Was it kind of overcast? It was, but there was some light that kind of came through, and you could see kind of the change and how it hit the water and the lilies. So, yeah, this piece is just part of that series.
We caught it it had rained all day, and we went to the little villages I grew up in France, and we got there at 4 o'clock, so all the bus tours were gone.
Oh, wow.
And it stopped raining, so the flowers were on fire.
Yeah.
This was like it was May. It was May, so it was early spring, so all those bulb plants were up. Everything was just opening back up again. But this was the most, it is magic, because you're walking in paintings.
Yeah.
You're right there, you're in the painting. I got me on the bridge. I took a picture of me on the bridge, because how do you get to do that, right?
Yeah.
I went 11 years ago.
Okay.
And it was an accident. I said, wait, we could take a detour.
Yeah.
And we accidentally ended up there
Wow.
for a couple of hours. But yeah, it was wonderful.
Yeah. So that's my tip.
To be in a painting, right?
Yes. And this is just, again, a series of pieces, different size, my approach to it. And it was funny because I was trying to figure out how would I approach it. That was a challenge for me, which I love, right? How much do I want to put in there? And again, you can kind of see some of the graphic design kind of elements of kind of my experience.
We
Yes.
got movement in the water.
Yes.
We
Yeah.
got the bugs moving through the water.
Right.
And those frogs don't sound like American frogs.
No. Or the chickens he had in that field either. There's chickens with huge
No, I
like
didn't see
feathers.
the
Oh,
chickens,
the
just
chickens,
the
they were
frogs.
looking weird. Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
crazy.
These pieces here, this is actually the beginning of me revisiting mixed media. Because for a while I didn't do collage work. Again, I just loved Ramir Bearden. But this was actually a school project that I had in my art class. It was for my Art 2 students. It's the second level of art, to where we actually it was a civil rights movement piece. And I wanted these students to pick an event and a person, and they're going to create artwork based on that. Few reasons why. One, they already disconnected generationally, right, because of time, so far removed. But then also, too, where they live in the county, right, and who they were. These were not kids who are kids of color. So it's like, how am I going to create something based on that? And I did this project to introduce collage to them, to where they could take different things. It wasn't necessarily about their skill level, because that's what I tell students. It's about the expression, you getting your thought out. And so this is a piece that I created. And this was kind of a tribute to, I don't know how many people remember him, but Ezra Jack Keats, famous children's book illustrator. Loved his book. It's a Snowy Day. That sound familiar? There we go. So I loved his books growing up in the library, and just loved his style. And so this is kind of an homage to him. But notice this is where I started with some of the very deep social content. In the back you see "End Racism." It's kind of split, and this is titled "I Can Do Anything," this piece. This piece, yeah, those who know it, it's called "They Never Outgrew Them." And so, of course, if you don't know the story, it's about the 4 little girls. And I forgot there were actually 5. And I think they actually interviewed the 5th girl, because I know she's blinded, but I think she can actually interview now. But 4 of the girls lost their lives. And so I wanted to take something of innocence, right? And again, it's me creating these pieces with this deep content, not to push people away because they're afraid to talk about it. I wanted to find a way to pull them in to talk about it. So I had these shoes, and of course back then it was the Sunday best patent leather shoes. So instead of being black, they're actually red for the blood that these little girls shed.
Right.
And like most parents here with your kids, because why? We lose things, and as kids we lose things, so parents would put your name in your clothes. Well, the ironic thing is these young girls didn't lose their shoes because they were careless. It's because someone who was evil took their life. And so they're the names of all the 4 girls there in this piece. And so it's titled, They Never Outgrew Them. And this piece is called, Can I Be Served? This was funny because it was in class, and these pieces I created in my class with my students because I want them to kind of see me create it as well. And so this is called Can I Be Served? And this is back in '63 in North Carolina at the Woolworths counter. You remember the sit-in where they would not be served. And so I thought about today because my kids were talking about Starbucks. And I talked about, it's funny how that's such a commodity to where we all can just walk in and buy Starbucks when we want. But that wasn't always the case. And so this is kind of dedicated to them with the question, he asked, can we be served or can I be served? And so it was just a play on that again, seeing it, thinking it's a regular coffee cup, but then you get close, you're like, is there something in the coffee? And then there's that beautiful image of that time.
You know, we went past our hour.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
This is what happens when you have an educator and he has great stories to tell. I appreciate this afternoon because these are deeper. You know, normally I like to have my story of what I see in your art, but your stories are magical in themselves in that they illuminate a life well lived and a good vision of the future. This is wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you.